Good morning. It's September 11th, and this is To My Liberal Friends. Well, a deal is a deal until it's not a deal, and that seems to be the thinking of some Republicans in Congress and Democrats in Congress and the White House. Back in May, Joe Biden and Kevin McCarthy engaged in a bit of brinkmanship and finally sat down and negotiated on the debt limit and future spending. The central point of the compromise was a 2-year budget deal that would essentially hold spending flat for 2024 while boosting it for defense and veterans. The deal also capped increases for 2025 at 1%, below the level of inflation, so it was a real money reduction in spending. Those were the things that McCarthy got in the deal. What Biden got was a 2-year extension that raised the debt limit for the next 2 years, which basically pushed this volatile political issue past the next presidential election. Now, to the hardline conservatives in the Freedom Caucus of the House, this deal fell well short of the sweeping cuts they were seeking. They've been balking at the deal ever since, and now that Congress returned from the August recess, they're threatening to withhold their votes if they don't get what they want. They forget that McCarthy also extracted from Biden increased work requirement for some food stamp recipients, and to many Democrats that had been a non-starter. But as in any negotiation, you don't get everything you want, and it results in a give and take. Democrats were forced to swallow the deal in support of Biden. Freedom Caucus members, led by Chip Roy, Republican from Texas, and some others, did not seem to realize that cutting spending deeper than the agreement might play well back in their ruby red districts, but would not survive in the Senate, where Democrats still hold a slim majority. And that brings us back to September, when Congress is way behind in its work product. Part of that deal was going to be that the appropriation process would return to a semblance of regular order. That means both houses of Congress would pass the individual bills and then head to conference to hammer out an agreement. There would be no more continuing resolutions or massive omnibus bills to fund the government. McCarthy's been working hard to get his caucus on board with this agreement and start passing these bills. He fully understands that failure to pass them would be a breach of faith, and to fail to get even a CR would result in a government shutdown. The media would immediately blame the Republicans for reneging on the deal. But now Joe Biden seemed poised to break the deal as well in an effort to get more spending. The White House bait, or cudgel, is a crisis disaster relief funding. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, warned in April that its disaster fund would be out of money by July. Yet somehow the administration didn't make a priority this critical in FEMA during the May debt ceilings talks, unwilling as it was then to cede any other domestic pork, such as green subsidies and its $80 billion IRS blowout. Only after next year's spending levels were set did it cry poverty and ask for an emergency $16 billion for FEMA. President Biden is threatening to blame Republicans for failing to help victims of Maui fires and hurricanes in Florida if they don't now give him the money that he didn't seem to care about back in May. The White House is playing hardball politics by insisting that an additional disaster money be included in its request for $24 billion in military aid to Ukraine. And that puts us at a basic stalemate. The Freedom Caucus says they won't give McCarthy the votes to pass the appropriations bills unless he makes deeper cuts, and the administration is demanding higher spending. Remember when Biden kept bragging about bringing the deficit down and how his economic program would continue to do so? Well, somehow, in some way, somebody should ask this doddering old fool how that looks today. The CBO just released its latest budget projections, and Biden must be living in a fog. They're estimating that the federal deficit will be $400 billion higher than they thought back in May. But in that report, the really scarier numbers are coming out. Quote, federal debt held by the public is projected to rise from 98% of GDP, gross domestic product, in 2023 to 118% in 2033, an average increase of 2 percentage points per year. And that's according to CBO. And they also say over that period, the growth of interest costs and mandatory spending outpaces the growth of revenues in the economy, driving up debt. Those factors persist beyond 2033, pushing federal debt probably around 195% of GDP in 2053. Now, these are all-time highs and should be of great concern to every voter, because unless we do something now, we are headed for a major fiscal crisis and ultimately the possibility of the nation becoming bankrupt. What needs to happen is both sides go back to the deal cut between Biden and McCarthy. Is it ideal? No, but it's a start that we can build on. To renege on the deal from either side and ruin a positive step in trying to rein in spending would be a disaster and something we just can't afford as a country. It's time to live up to the deal we cut. It's been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening.